At McDaniel High School in Portland, Oregon this morning, hundreds of students walked out of class. They marched through their neighborhood chanting, "ICE out of everywhere." They carried signs reading, "This is not normal." In Minneapolis, the Walker Art Center closed its doors. So did the Science Museum of Minnesota, the Children's Museum, the Minneapolis Institute of Art. In Portland, Miss Tecones, a Mexican vegan restaurant that can't afford to close on a Friday, closed anyway. In New York, businesses that survived last week's snowstorm donated half their proceeds to immigrant rights organizations. And across the country, from Maine to Oregon, from Atlanta to Cleveland, thousands of people did something that hasn't happened in America at this scale in decades. They went on strike. Subscribe to Capital Prime and turn on notifications, because what happened today, Friday, January 30th, 2026, represents the largest coordinated protest against federal immigration enforcement in American history. This is the story of the national shutdown. How 2 killings in Minneapolis sparked a movement that spread to every major city in America. And what it means when students, small businesses, and cultural institutions risk everything to say, enough is enough. The national shutdown is a nationwide general strike. The call is simple: no work, no school, no shopping. For 24 hours, all day Friday, January 30th, organizers asked Americans to halt normal economic activity to protest ICE operations and demand accountability for the killings of Renee and Alex Pretti in Minneapolis. The website nationalshutdown.org states it clearly: the people of the Twin Cities have shown the way for the whole country. To stop ICE's reign of terror, we need to shut it down. This wasn't organized by a single group or political party. This was decentralized, grassroots. Hundreds of organizations across dozens of cities coordinating through social media, word of mouth, and community networks. And it worked. Viola DeVigel is a sophomore at McDaniel High School in Portland. She helped organize this afternoon's rally at Glen Haven Park. It was honestly a really meaningful experience to me, she told reporters. I think it means so much to just see so much of my community and peers show up and show out to support each other and to support the community that is currently struggling. Hundreds of Portland public school students stayed home Friday. Those who showed up to school walked out. They marched through Northeast Portland carrying signs. They gathered at Glen Haven Park on Northeast 82nd Avenue for a rally. Logan L. Britton, a 17-year-old high school senior, told the Associated Press, "We're here to protest ICE and what they're doing all over the country, especially in Minnesota. It's not right to treat our neighbors and our fellow Americans this way." Think about that for a second. High school students, 17-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 15-year-olds, organizing mass walkouts to protest federal immigration enforcement tactics. Not because they're undocumented, not because their families are at risk, but because it's not right. That's not apathy, that's not ignorance. That's a generation that understands what's at stake. Polo Bañuelos and Carlos Reynoso own Mis Tacones, a vegan Mexican restaurant in Northeast Portland. They've run it for a decade. First as a pop-up, now as a brick and mortar on Northeast Killingsworth Street. On Thursday night, they asked their staff, should we close for the strike? In solidarity, we also decided to close our business, Bañuelos said. We want to be able to participate, but this was a collective decision because as a small business, closing is not easy. Many small businesses cannot afford to close. Friday is one of their busiest days. Closing costs them thousands of dollars in lost revenue. Bañuelos was born in the US to immigrants from Mexico. Reynoso was born in Mexico and moved to the US. As a kid, these decisions aren't taken lightly, Bañuelos said. Some folks have the privilege to be able to, well, we can do this. It might hurt a little bit, but we can do this, and it's going to be impactful. They weren't alone. Dozens of Portland businesses closed Friday. Mirasada, a Sri Lankan vegan restaurant cooperative, shut down even though Fridays are one of their busiest days. In Minneapolis, hundreds of businesses that closed last Friday for the Minnesota General Strike closed again. In New York, Otway Bakery stayed open, but donated half its proceeds to the New York Immigration Coalition. Across the country, business owners made a choice: short-term profit or long-term principle. Thousands chose principle. Here's what makes this different from previous protests. It wasn't just activists, it was institutions. The Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, one of the most prestigious contemporary art museums in the country, closed its doors. The Science Museum of Minnesota closed. The Minneapolis Institute of Art closed. The Minnesota Children's Museum closed. These aren't radical organizations. These are mainstream cultural institutions funded by donors, foundations, and public money. And they shut down for a day to protest federal immigration enforcement. When was the last time you saw major American museums close in protest? Organizers predicted 9 million participants nationwide. We don't have final counts yet, but here's what we know. Hundreds of students walked out in Portland alone. Dozens of businesses closed in Portland, Minneapolis, New York, Cleveland, Atlanta, and other major cities. Major cultural institutions in Minnesota shut down. Senator Susan Collins said ICE has ceased enhanced operations in Maine. Border czar Tom Homan said he's open to a drawdown of agents in Minneapolis. The DOJ announced it's opening a federal civil rights investigation into Alex Pretti's killing. That's not a coincidence. That's pressure working. To understand why this strike happened, you have to understand what's been happening in Minneapolis. January 7th, Renee Good, a 37-year-old mother of three, was shot and killed by an ICE agent. The government claimed she tried to run over an agent. Video shows she was driving away when she was shot. January 24th, Alex Pretti, a 37-year-old ICU nurse and U.S. citizen, was shot and killed by Border Patrol agents. The government claimed self-defense. Witnesses say the agent's account is false. Both victims were U.S. citizens. Both were killed by federal agents. Both were labeled terrorists by the Trump administration, despite video evidence contradicting the official narratives. And in between those killings, a 5-year-old boy named Liam Ramos was detained in his driveway and used as bait by ICE agents. That's what sparked this. The organizers of the national shutdown wrote on their website, while Trump and other right-wing politicians are slandering them as terrorists, the video evidence makes it clear beyond all doubt they were gunned down in broad daylight simply for exercising their First Amendment right to protest mass deportation. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who represents Minneapolis, promoted the strike on social media. Solidarity with every single person participating in today's general strike against ICE's terror campaign. Portland Mayor Mark Dion encouraged participation. Dissent is democratic. Dissent is American. It's the cornerstone of our democracy. Minnesota AFL-CIO President Bernie Burnham said union members would join with our fellow Minnesotans to reject fear and speak with one voice. As we call for ICE to leave our state, celebrity endorsements came from actor Pedro Pascal, actor Hannah Einbinder, and rapper Macklemore, who wrote on Instagram, "No system built on violence has ever been undone by reform. It ends when people stop sustaining it." This is that moment. On Thursday, the day before the strike, border czar Tom Homan made an announcement that would have been unthinkable 2 weeks ago. He said the administration is open to a drawdown of agents in Minneapolis, but only if state officials cooperate. Think about what that means. After 2 killings, after massive protests, after a statewide general strike, after businesses closing, after students walking out, the federal government blinked. Not completely. Not yet, but Homan's statement is a crack in the armor. It's an admission that the political cost of continuing ICE operations in Minnesota has become too high. Senator Susan Collins announced that ICE has ceased enhanced operations in Maine after more than 100 arrests. And on Friday morning, the day of the national shutdown, the Department of Justice announced it's opening a federal civil rights investigation into Alex Pretti's killing. Again, not a coincidence. That's pressure working. Step back and look at what happened today. First, student activism is back. Not since the 1960s and 70s have we seen high school students organizing mass walkouts at this scale. They're not waiting for adults to fix this. They're taking action themselves. Second, small businesses are choosing principle over profit. These aren't wealthy corporations that can absorb the cost. These are restaurants, cafes, and shops that operate on thin margins, and they're closing anyway. Third, cultural institutions are taking sides. Museums don't usually shut down for political protests. They pride themselves on being neutral spaces. But when they see what's happening in Minneapolis, neutrality feels like complicity. Fourth, the federal government is responding to economic pressure. Homan's willingness to consider pulling agents from Minneapolis isn't because of moral arguments. It's because the political and economic cost has become too high. Let's be honest about what the national shutdown didn't do. It didn't shut down the entire economy. Most businesses stayed open. Most people went to work. Most students went to school. Some businesses wanted to close but couldn't afford it. Cyrus Ichiza, executive chef at Jade Rabbit in Portland, said his restaurant stayed open because closing would create too much financial strain. I'm grateful for customer support and for anyone standing up against ICE, he said, but he couldn't close. That's the reality for most small businesses. They support the cause. They want to participate, but they can't absorb the financial hit. And that's okay. Not everyone can strike. Not everyone can afford to close. Not everyone can walk out, but thousands did, and that matters. The national shutdown was one day, Friday, January 30th. By Saturday morning, most businesses reopened. Students went back to class, but the movement didn't stop. Organizers are planning ICE out of everywhere events for Saturday, coordinated by Action Network and endorsed by the political organization 50501. 50 states, 50 protests one day. There are also no King's protests planned across the country to protest Trump's attempts to consolidate power. The question now is, can this movement sustain itself? One-day strikes create headlines, but systemic change requires sustained pressure over weeks and months. The civil rights movement didn't succeed because of one march. It succeeded because of years of sustained boycotts, sit-ins, and protests that made segregation economically and politically unsustainable. The question for this movement is whether today was a peak or a beginning. On Friday, January 30th, 2026, thousands of Americans, students, small business owners, museum staff, union members, did something that hasn't happened at this scale in decades. They went on strike to protest federal immigration enforcement and demand accountability for 2 U.S. citizens killed by federal agents. High school students walked out, restaurants closed, museums shut down. And the federal government, for the first time since this crisis began, signaled it might back down. This is what organized resistance looks like. Not violence, not destruction, just thousands of people saying, we will not participate in business as usual while this is happening. Subscribe to Capital Prime. Turn on notifications. Share this video. Because what happened today is historic. And what happens next depends on whether this movement can sustain the pressure. Drop a comment. Do you think the national shutdown will lead to real change? Or was it symbolic? This is Capital Prime, where we document movements, investigate power, and refuse to let injustice become normal. I'll see you in the next investigation.